was an outcast and I didn't want to be, you know, fit into this, you know, normal mold. Now I think, you know, I think you're more of an outcast if you don't get tattooed, you know? So that's enough to get started.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So hang out.
Good
Just lounge. But it definitely makes for being, it makes being a tattoo artist nowadays a lot easier than being a tattoo artist. You know, the guys that did it up until say the 90s, they had it way harder than people getting into it now. Yeah, I mean, we tattoo everybody across the board. I mean, and tattooing's always kind of been like that, even when it was underground, you still would, you know, tattoo, you know, lawyers and nurses and gangbangers and criminals and stuff like that. So you would always tattoo pretty much across the board, everyone. But now it's just like, multiply that by 1,000. And that's always weird too. I tattoo a lot of cops, which is totally weird for me because yeah, because when I was getting tattoos when I was 16, 17, and 18, and you know, it was to rebel, you know, and now it's like I'm tattooing cops, and it's weird. It's weird seeing them in here. You know what I mean?
I just care so much about tattooing because it's always been just such an incredible, you know, element of my life that everyone I've met through it, everything I've been involved in, it was always this pivotal point that I could go back to, you know. I just always felt like it was just very familiar, even though it wasn't, you know, like all the elements of it, I just was always drawn to it. And everyone that I've met through it has just been more of a reason to, you know, to fall back in love with it and to continue growing on it. And the people I've met that have put so much time and energy and their years of their life into it, I just want to continue building on that and to carry the torch properly. You know, I don't want to see that type of lineage get destroyed by people that don't care.
Apprenticeships have changed quite a bit, you know. Like, a lot of people don't really apprentice like they used to. You know, they're a little bit more lax about certain things. You know, I remember when I was apprenticing, it was making needles and tearing down machines and washing my teacher's car and picking up his kids and cleaning the toilet. I mean, all sorts of just like pick up cigarette butts in the parking lot for hours, you know, just tedious shit like that. And they don't really do that anymore, you know, like it's just, you know, come in here, clean the shop, answer the phone, draw, you know, okay, now you're ready to tattoo, or now you're ready to start practicing on fake skin, okay, now you're ready to jump into tattooing, you know, your friends. And they kind of miss out on that whole Karate Kid experience, you know. Do a bunch of tedious bullshit because it teaches you, you know, patience. It makes you really respect what you're doing. So, I mean, if you spend years, picking up cigarette butts and talking to clients, once you've done all that and then you finally get to become a tattoo artist, you really, really appreciate the fact that you're not doing a mundane job, you know what I mean? Because you worked so hard to get to that point. And I think a lot of, you know, modern tattoo artists are kind of lacking that. They didn't really have that experience.
And people start thinking that they don't have to follow any rules, and all of a sudden you see their tattoos 15 years later and they've completely fallen apart. They look like they don't hold up. You know, there's things that we're taught in our apprenticeships for a very specific reason. You know, if somebody has been tattooing for 20 plus years, you as a new tattooer need to stop talking and listen. And there's a lot of that not going on. There's a lot of willy-nilly tattooing and just doing whatever you think is cool because you went to art school, and just doesn't cut it. Your clients eventually will get pissed off. Your clients will eventually quit seeing you. You know, it's gonna come out. Tattooing brings out the truth eventually. I don't think anyone totally gets away with just taking advantage of what we do and never reaping the punishment that's going to come. Now, obviously, that's going to come in whatever shape it comes in, and it might not be really obvious right away. But, you know, I think you really have to honor your clients first. You should not be the show. Your clients and your work should be the show.
Yeah, go ahead and hop on up there. Ready to get started? All right. I'd always wanted to either do like tattooing or custom paint and fabrication for motorcycles. And I'd started to go down that motorcycle path and spend a bunch of money and time on my bike, and then I got hit by a car and it totaled the motorcycle. And you know, right then I made that switch. Because you put all that time and effort into a possession and it can just be taken away. You know, but when you get a tattoo, you get to keep it for the rest of your life.
You know, when I started, I embraced the pirate mentality, the underground aspect of it. I mean, I think that's why I got into tattooing, you know, is because I was a punk rock skateboarder growing up, and it's the same story. My age, if you talk to tattooers, you know, from my generation, you know, who started tattooing in the early 90s, it's pretty much the same story across the board, you know. People, I bet you 90% of them were punk rock kids, you know. That was the underground, you know, you wanted to do something different, you know. That's what I started seeing, you know. It was either bikers had tattoos, and then my punk rock friends started getting tattooed. It's like, I need to do that. So, and I wasn't, even when I started seeing tattoos on my brother. My brother's 7 years older than me, and he started coming home with tattoos when he was about 17. So I was about 10. I was somewhat fascinated by him, but I wasn't completely drawn in. It wasn't until I was, you know, a couple years older and I started playing in punk rock bands and hanging out in that whole scene, going to punk rock shows on the East Coast, where I started seeing kids heavily tattooed. You know, kids that were around my age, they were heavily tattooed. And that's when I really, you know, really kind of put its hooks in me, you know, and sucked me in. And even then, that was just for me to get them to be different from everyone else, you know, which is, like I told you before, is completely different than why people get tattooed now. A lot of people get tattooed because everyone else is getting tattooed. They're just kind of, you know, they're kind of like sheep just being herded, you know what I mean? You know, and I guess I was just a sheep being herded back then, but they were just a bunch of punk rock sheep.
This old man that worked at a corner store up from my house, he's a real grizzly old guy. He had a hook. He literally had one hand and he had a skull and crossbones on his forearm. And I just thought it was like the craziest, scariest thing ever, you know, like this guy that would he'd sell cigarettes to 12-year-olds. He didn't care, he shouted at everyone to leave the store. And he was real crazy, and I just thought that was the coolest thing ever for some reason. And ever since that, I was just like kind of glued to the power that a tattoo had, especially something like that, like, you know, just a big skull and crossbone, or, you know, something with that kind of impact. That kind of led me on. When I was 16, I got my first tattoo. We were in New Mexico, and there was a biker that he would tattoo anyone, you know. I thought for sure he thought I was 18, you know, but I was clearly like, I looked like I was 12, but I was 16. And he did some tattoo on me. It was really unorthodox and crazy. You know, he had like, it was in some busted trailer, and there was like, he had snakes everywhere. Like, it was really random and strange, but that was the first tattoo I got. And then from then on, I was just, you know, glued to it.
It wasn't until I was an angry teenager, around 17 or so, that I started getting into that whole punk rock rebelliousness kind of stuff. Yeah, but my first tattoo doesn't count. It was just ghetto hand poke kind of stuff that we did in the back of an art class whenever nobody was paying attention. It was like a blobby little smiley face with the bullet hole in its head, goofy late 80s kind of stuff. And no, it turned into a mess. You can't even see it anymore.
I was 23, I was a little late to the game, and I got it in Dallas. And I remember I was that person who walked in 15 minutes to close, and no wonder the artist was probably super irritated at me, but I was so nervous, but I was trying to keep it, you know, nice and calm. And I guess I was trying to prove myself, and then it never stopped. Like, it never stopped. It stopped being about proving myself and became like, I can modify myself in any way I want. And it just got crazy after that. Good crazy.
I mean, the first time I ever had ink in my skin was like, I had this little star right here. It's terrible, but I was like 16, and my stepsister's boyfriend, like, he showed me how to like put like a little needle in like a side of a ballpoint pen. Like, it was a really crude thing. It was terrible. I don't recommend anyone ever do it, but you know, that was kind of my introduction to it, you know. I didn't get my first professional tattoo till, you know, much later.
Getting my first tattoo was a really crazy experience. I was a very lost 17-year-old girl hanging out with some wild older people, and a friend of ours was doing tattoos out of his apartment, and I had had a friend that killed himself. And this was my second friend in, I guess it was maybe 1 year. It was really quick. It was the first time I'd ever seen a tattoo get done. I mean, I knew it wasn't the professional way, but I remember it had such an impact on me because there were other people there. It was kind of like a tattoo party. And I just remember thinking it was so cool, and it just grabbed me. It definitely forever changed my course at that moment. You know, tattoos were healing, and how, you know, the pain felt good. You know, I never had that kind of relationship with pain until that moment. Probably, and this is what I tell people now a lot, like when you're in emotional pain, having physical pain like that has a beginning and an end is very healing, because emotional pain just doesn't work that way. It's kind of a lingering feeling, or stuff can trigger it. But a tattoo is not like that. You know, you go in, you're in pain for a little bit, and then it's over, and then you heal it. And all that can be a very therapeutic process just in and of itself, without adding any, you know, crazy philosophy to it.
Silk and olive night clothes, if you can someday stop by. Somehow we'll show you the pictures and fix you some tea. See, my dad's getting a bit older now, and just unimaginably lonely.
It used to be when you'd walk into a tattoo shop, you'd just pick, you know, tattoo flash off the wall. But now people, for some reason, think that's a terrible idea. And then they show you a picture of a Google image search on their phone.
We say all the time we should just take down all the paintings and put up computer screens and have Google waiting for people to come in, because people really just discard the whole idea of Flash.
If you can find that image on Google and it's a tattoo, somebody's already got it. Or 5 people got it. 5 versions of the same Google image.
It's bizarre, you know, it's like they really, the only way that they'll get inspired is from their computer screen or their phone or whatever, you know, their electronic device. The whole soul of it's lost in that, you know, and they come in and they probably looked at that for hours and thought that that was going to be the end all, like the best thing that they could get, and they come in and see all these things that kind of conflict that and contradict that. If they just came in and actually embraced what we have and saw it for what it is, then they would have much better tattoo experience and end up with a much better product, you know.
That's kind of changed tattooing. The internet's definitely changed it a lot.
It seemed like it was a very sudden shift about 10 years ago. 10, 12 years ago. Something happened. It started getting just mainstream attention.
I mean, it's changed drastically, but it's really hard to think about every little thing that's changed about it, you know? Not to mention the popularity has changed. I mean, obviously, popularity is a lot more popular than it used to be. It's changed for the better, in my opinion. I think it's only going to get better.
I think it's kind of a golden age for tattoos right now. And I think if anything before, it was like maybe like that initial like rush of energy of like, you know, people like getting this, you know, so much national attention being put on tattooers and stuff. You know, and I think all that silly stuff is kind of like dying down now. It's tapering off, which is good because it just kind of leaves like the rest of us like blue collar tattoo workers there. Just, you know, make art and do it well and, you know, just get on like without all of the, you know, all the fame that some people were kind of going crazy for there for a while.
And now, yeah, like you're saying, you get cute little old grandmas saying like, I would love to get one of those tattoos. Do you think that color would look good on my skin? And it is kind of a trip whenever people, you know, come in and they're bringing their mothers and grandmothers.
You know, as much as the tattooing shows drove a lot of the industry crazy, I have to admit, as a woman, they made it infinitely easier for me. And I owe it to people like Kat Von D and Kim Say and Hannah Atchison who, you know, were brave enough to go on TV and stick their necks out and, you know, risk the Hollywood industry to, you know, make tattooing more popular. And they changed the career for all tattooers and especially young female tattooers. When I first started tattooing and getting tattooed, I mean, the things that people would say to you are shocking, you know? I mean, you would never walk up to an obese person and just be like, geez, you know, what are you doing to yourself? But back then, when there weren't the TV shows with beautiful women on there, you know, covered in tattoos, I mean, you would hear things like, what have you done to yourself from strangers?
My husband is heavily tattooed. I can see somebody look at him and they're okay, and then I can see somebody look at me and I'm in my work attire. If I take off my jacket and then they look at me, I can visibly see that their expression or perhaps their acceptance in me changes. I don't know why that is, but I've had people come up to me in the grocery store and want to preach to me and tell me that I was going to hell for my tattoos.
Or, you know, touching you without asking, you know, asking all sorts of inappropriate questions. Men walking up to me asking me, oh, where else are you tattooed? Really skeezy stuff.
I worked at Walmart a couple years ago, and this older guy used to always come in, and I noticed he had a couple of tattoos, like just sparsely on his arms. And one day he came in and he commented on mine, and he said, you should have never got those, that's stupid, and was just kind of like downgrading the fact that I had them. So I asked him about his. He was like, if I could go back, I would have never got them. He goes, but it was a hard time. He goes, so whenever I see people now that have them, especially women, I think women are such beautiful people and they already are supposed to be perceived having beautiful bodies. Basically saying it's better if men have them and women don't.
Sometimes male clients, or female clients for that matter, just they don't expect you to be competent at your job.
Even with female clients, you're gonna have this underlying sexism of like, you know, really lifting you up for being a woman, or you're somehow going to do better for them because you're a woman and they have maybe an unnecessary amount of confidence in you.
One of my bosses told me, if somebody comes in here, they're in your house, they're in your environment. You can tell them to leave, you can tell them the truth. I mean, everybody in here is gonna have your back. And so that's really changed how I deal with things as a woman, as a person, as a tattoo artist, as a professional in any kind of environment.
I got to work with Andrea Elston from Eastside Ink in New York, who is probably the best tattooer that I've ever been around in any super close setting, and definitely one of the best female tattooers I've ever met. If you listen to her stories, it's how you know, that's how I knew how good I had it. You know, up until she came along, it wasn't very obvious to me. And then when I got to work with her for years, I just realized, like, wow, you know, this has been a cakewalk. I mean, when you have someone else come along and tell you their stories and, you know, how they were treated when they went to Japan, or, you know, what they had to put up with just to even be able to make tattoos, maybe not even for money, but just to make it out of this need inside of themselves, and how to break through that boys club that it used to be. I mean, it just definitely, like, I don't even know what that's like. I didn't have to break down any barriers. I mean, I got to walk in, learn how to tattoo, and make a lot of money.
The integrity is really important because it's kind of like an actor. You act in bad movies and you're not going to get asked to do good movies. You just got to figure out a polite way to tell people no and point them in the right direction.
A lot of people don't understand that, but you want to give them something that they're going to be proud of 10 years down the line. Not necessarily just something that's going to be cool or hip or trendy right now. And something that's also going to look good. You know, because of the way that it ages, there's certain things that you just don't want to compromise on. Size, placement, level of detail, or a lack of proper contrast. You don't want to compromise so much that you're compromising your own standards. So if it gets to where you're starting to feel that way, like you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, then that's where you just have to turn down the job.
I think if you walk that line of integrity with tattooing, you're gonna please the client. I mean, definitely, like, you know, I'm not trying to, like, you never want to railroad a client, you know, like, because they're there, like, they're, you know, they're vulnerable, they're, like, presenting themselves to you, like, paying you money to do it, like, you got to respect them too, but they also have to know what kind of tattooer you are, and, like, what you plan to do.
So yeah, sometimes you do have to turn down jobs, and it's frustrating whenever you can't get that across to the person involved, you know, like, well, I'm turning you down because we just can't meet in the middle. You're taking way too much from this, and you're going to end up with something that's not going to be that good. Again, it is kind of customer service oriented, so you want to help out as many people as you can. But if you feel like you're selling your soul at the end of the day, if you feel like you're just, you know, going through the motions to make a paycheck, then there's no joy in that.
I really love the historical aspect of tattooing. And that's something I think that comes from just being into tattooing so long. You can't help but want to understand where it came from or where certain styles, you know, come from. And it's just paying respects to the people that paved the way for us to do what we do. Because at the end of the day, I mean, it's an amazing job, and it's hard, and it's, you know, and you know, when I go and I meet the old timers and I hear their stories and the same, you know, struggles that I feel like, you know, the things that I struggle with tattooing, and to hear the same stories from other artists and the old timers and how they got through it. And I think it's just tattooing is just a crazy industry to be in, you know. And I think if you survive it and you live a long time and you do it for a long time, that's pretty amazing.